Melissa and I both came out of Oberlin, I in 92, Melissa in 93, and went directly into graduate school. Surprisingly for me, because I was actually a neuroscience major, so I'm looking around at these new digs and thinking, gosh, if they'd had this when I was here in 92, I might have pursued that, and I wouldn't even be here today. But I went to school for directing in Louisiana.
And I went to graduate school in San Diego for acting after taking a year off to work as an actor and then study acting in San Diego.
And so when we came back to New York, we both were essentially freelancers in a fundamental sense. Mm-hmm. Melissa was a freelance actor and I was a freelance director, and that's what we really did. But both of us, while we were at Oberlin, we had gotten connected with a program in Lorain, Ohio, called the Summer Theater Enrichment Program, which actually, much to our excitement, still continues to this day. It was built in the wake of the LA riots, and it was a theater program for gang-connected youth. Not a sort of don't be in gangs, but more, why are there gangs? Why is that so prevalent in our urban communities, and how do we change that? Theater as a form of crisis intervention and self-expression. And so I had sort of parlayed that into a career that allowed me to be a freelance director as well. I was at a place called Theater for a New Audience and making money. And then in 2000, I'll take the first. We had a little plan here for what we're taking. But in 2000, we really began to think about what was missing in off-Broadway theater, off-Broadway non-commercial theater specifically, which is where we were interested in working. And there were three things that we felt were critical and just not there. One was an explicitly political sensibility about the work that you were making. Not just that the plays were political or about social issues, but the fact that you were making plays had a impact on our civic milieu, right? Plays had become a kind of a sidebar in the off-Broadway world. A sidebar of the off-Broadway world that wasn't impacting other areas of the civic dialogue. And the critical thing that we felt, and this is where I think the entrepreneurial spirit came in, was we had theaters that were running massive education programs in the public schools and big off-Broadway shows, and those people, the people in those two programs, weren't crossing over. They weren't the same people. They were two different sets of people, often with the same skills. Why that was such a problem for us is you're really not building long-range audience development. You're reaching kids in the South Bronx, but you're not teaching them what professional theater is. You're not saying make a commitment in the arts as a future, not even as an actor, but as a viewer.
Yeah.
And
so I'm just curious,
thing,
because along these lines, being a teaching artist for many years, as well as being a professional actor in New York City, I'm just curious, how many of you guys know have you heard the term teaching artist? Is that something that's familiar to you? Raise your hand if you've heard that. Okay, a few, yeah. A teaching artist is a professional theater maker who goes into the schools and works in partnership with a classroom teacher, primarily in New York City in the public schools, to over the course of anywhere from just a few visits to long range like we do over several months, working with a classroom teacher to create an interdisciplinary project in their academic classroom. And that, in our case, in our theater's case, culminates in a performance that illuminates a social question through original writing and mentorship by our company. But I was a teaching artist for many years before co-founding Epic at the major theaters that you might recognize, Roundabout Theater Company and Manhattan Theater Club. And I was a teaching artist in the schools, and then I would be, going through a completely different door to audition as an actor. And they wouldn't know me in that room, in the audition room, from the fact that I was the most employed teaching artists in their theater, because their actual offices were in different spaces. So we were trying to begin
synthesize those two things.
Synthesize those things,
one of the things that immediately, again, this is where I think the entrepreneurial idea came in, was so many people start theater companies in New York and other cities, and they don't begin with the idea of pay as fundamental, that, you can't be an artist without getting paid. And I feel it's Dana Gioia, who's the chair of the National Endowment of the Arts, was just saying, if artists have only one set of people really to blame for the fact that they are not compensated sufficiently, and it's them. So one of the things that we felt really strongly about in founding Epic was, from day one, you are paid. You make money. You know, you might not be able to make as much money as you might like, but you have to be able to live at a certain rate in New York, or else it's not worth doing. So that was like a fundamental tenet of where we began. So how did we start?
So we began having these what we called salons, where we would, over the course of 6 months prior to well, actually more like 9 months prior to our founding date, which I'll tell you in a moment, our starting date rather, we began to meet with different artists, talking about what kind of theater, would be your dream theater company, given the tenet that we are starting a theater that is socially conscious and is building a bridge between education and off-Broadway. And we started to detail it, and we began with, probably 30 artists over the course of 6 months coming through our living room. Yeah. And then ultimately 9 of us became the founding artists. And one of the big things was that it was artist run.